All right, guys. Big news today. Big news today. We're going to wait just a few more minutes to make sure as many people can get in here before we start talking about the announcement. Um, Obviously, guys, this is something that we're monitoring day by day. I will say this, as always, we get some news. We get the roster set date. And I want to throw out some thanks to Canes for, he was kind of the first guy to scoop this up and see that it was announced and sent it my way. So appreciate that, Canes, if you're in the chat. And again, we get the roster set date, but there's still some ambiguity about how it's going to work. I will say it's going to be controversial. Already a bunch of people are commenting about it, what they think. So we're going to go over that. And really, guys, it's like the NCAA is doing this on purpose, where they're just slowly kind of a piece at a time. They're letting it out what they're gonna do, what the fine print's gonna be. So just like I said, in a few more minutes, we're gonna go straight to it. Today, we're gonna be covering, this fall roster size being set, or not the size, but the set date. The date when the 34-man roster has to be set. That's what's been announced. What is the impact going to be of this date? What could potential repercussions be? What could future rule changes be because of this date? And then we're going to get into, my brother posted out a thread you can see on our page about kind of what a daily timeline looks like for college athletes, and we'll go over that, kind of just what your time is going to be spent doing pretty much day to day on a college campus as a baseball player and typically as an athlete. We're going to go over, what the winter recruiting is like for high schoolers right now, why it typically slows down, and then, we'll cover a bunch of stuff. So that's kind of the agenda and the timeline for today. Kane's already in the chat. How does the roster limits different from the current date currently? Are you talking about the set date? So right now, your roster has to be set and to 40 by the spring. By the time in the spring when you're about to go into the season, so it's definitely going to be different now. And it's 40 right now, Kane. So obviously it's going to be going down from 40 to 34. I know you probably know that, but those are the big differences with the rosters now. And so, like I said, we're going to get into that in just a second as I pull this up. So this is going to be from Mike Rooney over at D1. He's a college baseball analyst, does a lot of work for, you'll see him on D1 Baseball. You'll see him a lot during the College World Series time, and going to give kind of his thoughts on this and what he thinks about all these changes and about this announcement of the roster date. So let's get into it, guys. Right here. Hopefully you guys can read this. So Mike Rooney says, I'd hope this was just a rumor, but here we go. 34-man baseball rosters will be declared on December 1st. His thoughts. This is materially worse than our current roster management system, and the current system has huge issues. We will be cutting massive numbers of players right before finals. So, guys, typically, any of you guys that have obviously been in college, your winter finals are coming up that first and second week of December. The end of that first week of December, maybe a little bit after that, but definitely, you're finishing up around, depending on the schedule of your finals, this week right now. So you're December, maybe December 12th or something like that. So usually you get your finals done. Most people at this time are already at maybe back home if they live close and they're just driving up for their finals. So this is going to have massive repercussions. And, we got a thing from Canes here. For Miami specifically, I don't see much of a change. We usually cut our guys after the fall so they can find a place to play during the spring. Miami went from 42 to 36 after the fall. Yeah, and again, the problem is, Canes, is usually how it works is you tell people after your fall workouts, like, hey, here's the options. You probably should go in the portal. You're not going to get a lot of playing time. You're probably not going to be on the travel roster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But generally speaking, most players have kind of had the decision to be like, you know what, even with that information, like school like Georgia Tech or Miami, like I want this degree. I came here to get, hopefully play baseball, but also I came here to get the degree. Well, now with 34-man rosters, those guys don't have a choice of sticking around. So essentially what you're doing is now, a week or two before finals, you're forced to tell those kids, you don't, if you had a scholarship, you don't have one anymore. You're not on the team. Again, there's a difference between, hey, you're not going to get any playing time and you're not going to do this. And you're not going to, even if you're not on the spring roster, technically you're still on the team, right? You have guys that don't make the travel roster. They're still there for the home games. They're still there to, be in the dugout, be with the team when they're playing in their home games. What's now happening with the 34-man roster is this is a hard date limit, meaning you can't have any guys extra on the team that you would. And so Miami, for example, may go to 36, but again, now they're going to have to be at 34. And a lot of schools, they're still making decisions about guys. Again, you could be in a situation where you have 2 or 3 lineup competitions going on. Your third baseman, your second base position, and left field. Guys are competing for those roles, and you have maybe 2 guys each position that you're seriously considering, and you want to maybe, like I've talked about yesterday, that those first 4 weeks of a season, those guys are on your 40-man roster. Most of your first 4 weeks are going to be at home typically, and so you can afford to say, okay, well, this guy's going to start opening night, opening weekend, or maybe he starts Friday. Another guy starts Saturday, and we're going to see which one of them over these next couple weeks wins the position and shows us, he can make all the plays. He's doing well with his bat. Well, that's not an option now because this 34-man roster has to be set December 1st. So all these decisions about your lineup, again, same thing is true in with your bullpen roles. You're having guys compete for bullpen roles. You're having guys compete for maybe that midweek rotation spot is still up for grabs. Well, again, you have to make these decisions now after the fall is over. So now more than ever, if you're a high school player out there, your freshman fall is even more important now than ever before, because a lot of guys, like I say, they win those spots in the fall, but there are usually a few spots in the lineup that are up for grabs even going into those spring workouts. Because remember, baseball activities start back up. Once you get back on campus, you got some individual work, and then a few weeks into it, you got your official practices starting 2 or 3 weeks before the season starts. And you're having inter squads, you're building guys up pitching-wise, and you got 2 or 3 weeks to have a little bit more competition for those final spots that may be up for grabs. That's not the case anymore. And again, now, if you're a player that gets cut, you may not even be able to, you're immediately going to be, if you're trying to play baseball and you're trying to, progress your career in baseball, I mean, you're in the transfer portal immediately, and then you're trying to get somewhere else where you can play right before you take finals. And it's just going to be a mess. And so again, we'll go into, this is the official ruling right here. When must schools be in compliance with new roster limits? And so for baseball specifically, for winter and spring sports, schools must be at or below the roster limits no later than December 1st or the first contest that counts for championship selection in the relevant sport. So if you read just that part, you think, oh, okay, so December 1st or right before the first game of the season, essentially. Well, now you go to the parentheses that said whichever is earlier. So for baseball, your first game isn't until the middle of February or near the end of February, typically around, February 15th to 18th, wherever the weekend falls. But now, because of these rules, you got to make your roster limits and decide your roster December 1st. So 2.5 months before your first game. Whereas in the fall, your fall sports, they just have to be at the roster limit before their first date of competition that counts for championship selection. So your first game in that relevant sport. So football, for example, is still going to be able to have those summer, your football, your spring football, everything like that. You're going to be able to bring in guys that may not end up on the roster, and you don't have to make that decision up until game time. So you got as much time as possible to evaluate your guys. Well, now with these changes, it is looking like schools are going to have the option now to bring in walk-ons, because at least they'll be able to practice and be involved in inter squads and everything like that until December 1st. But again, now with a 34-man roster, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to. You're certainly not going to be able to bring in a lot of walk-ons, because guys are just not. They're going to know what's up. When the roster's at 40, you can say, "Listen, we got 40 roster spots to fill. You got a great shot of coming in and you perform. You're gonna make the team. You may not make the travel roster, but you're gonna make the team." And now, if you're a walk-on, again, really the only walk-on schools are going to be able to recruit now are guys that you've already gotten into school. You're a pretty good baseball player, and you just decided I want to walk on. But again, it's almost the only walk-ons you're going to get are people that really want to go to that school, number one priority, and then hope they can make the team. No longer are you going to have guys that are like, I want to go there to walk on. I'm going to walk on because you may not make the team. So the environment's different. You are going to be able to bring in some walk-ons and have some higher roster number in the fall. But it's just a question of how many are you going to be able to convince to do that. You don't have that extra portion of, January and February where guys can still compete to get on the roster. You're not going to have that. And again, it's like, why couldn't this date be middle of December? Why couldn't this date be after finals week? I don't know why December 1st is so crucial. Again, because if you make it the caveat of, either right before your first game or this date, whichever is earliest, you might as well set that date to at least at the end of the semester, at the end of classes being done. So at least a kid can finish up that first semester and get that under his belt. Now kids are getting, it's going to be interesting how this plays out. And again, look at the note at the bottom. Additional requirements related to roster limits, whether a particular student athlete must be included on a team's roster, are being developed. So like I've been telling you guys, a lot of this fine print is not going to come out maybe sooner than what we've heard, but, around March or April. And really the question now becomes, what do you do if a bunch of guys get hurt? What do you do? At least now you can bring in some extra guys in the fall. We know that. Again, it's going to be tough to bring in quality, high-level extra guys. But you can bring in guys in the fall, but what happens if you set that roster and then first 3 weeks of the January, February timeline when you're doing individuals, you're throwing bullpens, and you get into inter squads and practices? What happens if you have 3 or 4 guys go down and now you're down to 30 guys in your 34-man roster? Because remember, now you can't have anyone extra practicing. You can't, from what this is saying, you can't have anyone extra on that roster that's allowed to practice with the team, work out with the team, anything like that. So it's like I've said, what are you going to have a group of extra guys, working out with the club team on campus and getting practice in that way? And Is the coach going to be allowed to kind of monitor it with the club coach and be like, hey, make sure this guy's getting, this many innings in a week and this guy's getting the bats? And like, it's just opening up so many question marks. And we'll go into kind of some of the comments down here from this thread. So Mike Rooney, again, the number of players being disqualified from playing D1 baseball each spring, which is already too high, will increase significantly. So basically, guys, if you're cut and you transfer mid-year, so after this fall semester, you're not eligible to play at Division I that next semester. And Rooney even says, like, I'm against mid-year transfers being eligible, but if this doesn't change, that must be strongly considered. 2 thumbs down on this. The date just doesn't make sense, right? The date, it's like move it 2 weeks later. Move it at the end of the semester after everyone's taken their finals. And now it's like, okay, now we have to consider, okay, if they do end up making mid-year transfers of eligible, which is, again, may not happen in the first year, but is probably likely to happen with these changes, unless they either have to move the date or they have to make mid-year transfers eligible. But here's the can of worms that would open. And I'm curious, obviously any questions you guys have, let me know. Obviously this is a lot of stuff that's coming at us real quick. But, thinking down the line in my head, if all of a sudden you make mid-year transfers eligible, so you could, and again, if there's no caveat that you got cut, but you just decided to go in the portal, what you could see end up happening is, let's say a star player as a freshman goes to a school, and like D1 baseball, like they do a great job with their fall reports, and they talk about position competitions and what the lineup's going to look like in the future, projecting that out. And hey, coaches have said this guy's had an amazing fall. He's going to be a fixture in the lineup. Well, all of a sudden, that kid's like, you know what? I'm not getting any NIL money from my school right now. And he goes, I'm going to go in the portal because now I can transfer wherever I want and I'm eligible. And a bigger school gives him a heap of NIL money, and now he's eligible to play at another school. So that, and that you can tell that's what's going on in the back of Rooney's head. He's like, I'm not for mid-year transfers because, again, it's just like, if you commit to a school and you get on campus, you should at least be there for a year. But now if schools are, forced to cut guys and guys are allowed to go in the portal, then you kind of have to, if they get a shot at another D1, you have to kind of make them eligible. And then that opens up like we saw with how the portal's gone now. The portal originally by the NCAA, the thought was, man, give the kids that aren't playing a shot. Don't make them sit out a year. Let them go transfer to another school, and they can be eligible the next year. And what did that turn into? Well, freshman All-Americans and All-Americans in Division I baseball were just transferring to different schools and getting more NIL money, more scholarship money, everything like that. So the transfer portal, originally, the thought process was, no one thought a big-time player was going to leave to go to another big-time school. But when you include NIL with the portal, you are just incentivizing players to transfer to get more money. And so this isn't a ruling yet that you can be eligible transferring to another Division I in the mid-year period. But like Rooney says, if this is how it's going to be, you got to strongly consider allowing players to be eligible if they decide to transfer. Zachary Sims says, there is no good time for either the athletes or the coaching staff, but having it on December 1st is certainly going to make things interesting. I disagree. I think there's maybe you could say there's no perfect time, but there's certainly better times. And again, this date just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense when it applies to spring sports, because now coaches have to make that roster. So they're going to set this roster. They're going to make that decision in the middle of end of November to have it set by December 1st. And now you're getting, again, you have kids that are going to have to go in the portal, and they still got class. They still got finals to take care of. And so what's the ruling going to be if a kid goes in the portal November 23rd, or, and obviously they have to go in after the Thanksgiving. So let's say November 30th. Now they have to make a decision if they get into another school, and now they're no longer enrolled. Like, they got to finish it out, and it just is complicating it for the players. And here's our boy Canes. We just cut 6 guys before 12-1. And Canes, obviously, you're saying like Miami's kind of always cut guys at this point, but remember, these are guys that a lot of these guys that are cut, not all, but a lot of these guys are cut that are like your walk-on type players. I will say it's weird that Miami cuts down to like 35 or 36 or something like that, because again, you kind of want to have as many guys as you want to have that roster full in case you have a lot of injuries. Steamboat Stevie, it's amazing just when you think the NCAA can't get any, I'll say dumber, not stupider, with their defections, they outperform themselves. Baseball has been getting the shaft for the last 40 years. Yes, I said that. Yeah, I mean, baseball has. And again, I mean, my dad is, it's funny, when he was in high school, he had full ride offers, from Mike Martin Sr. when he was an assistant at Florida State, offered him University of Florida, University of Miami. He ended up going to St. Petersburg Junior College because the Yankees drafted him out of high school and said, you go to JUCO for 1 year, we'll draft you higher. And then the Expos ended up drafting him out of there. But it used to be, it used to be every baseball team had full ride offer. Every baseball player had full ride offers, but then you bring in Title IX and everything like that. And baseball has so many guys on the roster that you just couldn't, if you're going to equalize the scholarships amongst the men's and women's sports, baseball kind of got the shaft in that, because remember, football takes up until these changes over 100 scholarships. And they're the ones that bring in all the money. So Kane says, we cut a scholarship player. Yep. We're seeing that more now. I mean, it used to be if you were a scholarship player, you were not going to get cut in the fall. You were not going to get cut. But now you're going to see it happen more regularly, I would say. But again, if you can't convince kids to come walk on, you're not going to see a lot of scholarship guys get cut anymore, because you're just not going to have any extra guys. Kane says, I also did DM Rooney the info about the 2 schools, and this was his answer. Yep, and there's a big difference between a school saying they're going to do this and then actually doing it. But as we know, salary cap is a powerful ingredient in winning. Yeah, and we're still working on that, Canes, figuring out the truth about, Clemson. Are they really going to 34 full rides? Again, sometimes these things, someone says something to the tune of, yeah, we could be going to that. And then you play the telephone game, and 3 people down the line, they're like, yeah, Clemson's going to 34. Again, Clemson's going to be tops of the ACC, whatever they feel like they need to do. They're certainly going to have a large number of scholarships. But until we have confirmation, we won't know for sure what that number truly is going to be. So, guys, this is going to be this is obviously a massive change in college baseball. This is, again, the date does not really make a lot of sense for what NCAA is trying to do. And, another thing I wanted to talk about, and, we'll look at this right here, but as I pull this up, the other thing you guys in high school are competing with, and this is something you really need to take seriously. These are the oldest players in the SEC, so let alone college baseball. Will Mercer, 25 and a half. Hayden Scott, almost 25. Connor McBride, almost 25. Nick McKay, 24 and a half, 24 and a half, 24 and a half, 24 and a third. So you got this many dudes across the SEC that are, like, just for perspective, guys, I was 24 in AAA. And I was old for my class when I got drafted. So I was a draft eligible sophomore, didn't sign, and then signed as a junior. So I was 22 when I signed. And by the time I was 24 years old, I was in AAA. These guys are older than me. You know, I was 24 and like a month old. So 24 and 30 days when I made it to AAA. These guys, some of these guys are a year or older than I was when I was in AAA in professional baseball. So one level away from the big leagues. And I think this is the impact that the NIL is having. The shortened MLB draft is you have these guys, and now you have and you have guys with extra years of eligibility, and it's like this guy came to school when he was 18, and he's going to be 20, and he's 25. Even if Will Mercer came to school when he was 19, he's been in school for 6 years now. I mean, these guys all have minimum 5-6 years of eligibility right now. So if you're a high school player, like you're playing against guys that are you're playing against guys that should be in the upper levels of the minor leagues at the age they're in, at the age they are. If you're a good professional player out of college and you perform at every level, you're going to be around this age at minimum AA. So this is what you guys are competing against now. This is what you guys are dealing with. A 25-year-old who's probably he may have 1,000 college at-bats under his belt. And he's probably got a heck of a track record. This guy's going to play. He's a grizzled vet. From Canes. From the scholarship player answers, I meant to say that all of our cuts were scholarship. The only walk-on we cut decided he would rather be the team reporter instead, which is great. More info. What I would say also, Kane, is sometimes those guys that say, well, I just made the decision to be the team reporter or the team manager or whatever. A lot of times it's kind of like the conversation is like, you're probably not going to be on the team. So again, he could just have made that decision, but I can't imagine a kid was told, hey, you can either be on the team or you can just be the team reporter or something like that. Again, maybe, but a lot of times that's a conversation with the coaching staff where you're told, hey, you're probably not going to be on. You're not going to be playing. You're not going to play for us. About the scholarship, so all of the guys that Miami cut were scholarship players. Again, the reason you're seeing that happen now when it never happened before is because you see this 34-man roster coming, and with all the guys in the portal, you may try to grab some of them. You may try to grab some of these guys in the portal. If you let's say for example, you feel like you got a strong position player core. You got a strong position player core. You got a strong 2 or 3 guys on the bench that could fill in and do a good job. And then you got like 5 position players that are freshmen or freshmen and sophomores that are on scholarship they did not do well in the fall. But your pitching staff, and Canes, like Miami's pitching staff, a lot of new guys. And if you feel like you want to bring in some proven college arms that can bolster that pitching staff, well, you're going to cut the freshman position players that are on scholarship or the sophomore position players that are still on scholarship that aren't really going to be contributors on the team and may not even make the travel roster. So you're going to cut those guys and say, you know what, let's add, we may bring in another position player or 2 that we think can help bolster that bench, but we're going to bring in 3 pitchers that have, 100 innings under their belt and have put up good numbers. So that's the question. Yeah. Kane says, I want to see the oldest players in ACC now. Yeah, I know. I was looking for that graphic and I couldn't find it. I'm sure we could probably find it somewhere. Maybe if I even put this down here, stop sharing this, and maybe let's see if I can Google this oldest. (2025). Let's see what we find. See if anything comes up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find list of oldest. No, that's not it. I don't know if I can find it right now, but certainly we'll look at it. We'll see if we can find one of those Canes. I know you can dig and research for me. See if you can find something. But again, yeah, I mean that again, those are the oldest guys in the SEC. And those guys were all, I think the youngest guy on the list was basically, he was 23 in 365 days. So he's 24. And so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 guys that are all 24 or older in the SEC. 100% it's equal or more in the ACC and the other big conferences. Tennessee had 3 of these guys. On the list. And let's just check that. Or sorry, that's not Tennessee, it's Texas. The T on the graphic was a little bit deceptive. And so Texas has 3 guys, 2 of which are 24 and a half, and 1 guy's 25. Everyone else has 1 guy on that list. So Texas is old, boys. Texas has got the old guys in the SEC. But like you said, Canes, I mean, certainly it's an equal number of guys that are 24 or older in the ACC. I know a guy on Georgia Tech, John Giesler. He's probably 23 minimum, 24. Going to be 24 probably in the middle of the season. So across college baseball now, shoot, the average age in the big conferences is probably like 21. It's probably 21, the average age of a starter in the big conferences. And again, when I played, we had 5 freshmen in the starting lineup. So our average age was somewhere around 19. So that's a 2-year difference in the average age. If I'm just kind of extrapolating and doing math in my head, that's probably not 100% accurate. But this is what you're seeing is the portal and these eligibility, guys are, it used to be, if you applied for an extra year of eligibility, it was a nightmare to do. And the likelihood of you getting it was virtually 0. And now it seems like you just fill out the application and you get it, because there's how many guys can have this many years of eligibility on top of the COVID guys that we were dealing with for so long. And even though that eligibility is gone, it's no longer impacting the rosters. So certainly some people are still on teams that have that extra year, but it's not as many as it was. And so obviously any questions you guys have about this fall roster date, if some of you missed it, what the impacts are going to be. Again, just to show you guys, this is the roster date set. For those of you guys that missed it earlier, roster date is going to be set, has to be declared and finalized on December 1st. So Reyes, how can an 18, 19-year-old kid go to a D1 when you're going to be playing with grandpas? You've been guaranteed the bench. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, with the clients, again, if you guys are looking for help, go to this QR code that's in the top left corner of the screen. Looking for recruiting help out of high school or in the portal. Go to that QR code, scan it, fill out the form. We'll meet with you, talk about how we help, what we do, where you could potentially end up. But yeah, Reyes, I mean, that's the reality that most kids, especially kids that are still, like even 26s, for example, they saw kids that they knew that are 2 years older than them, 3 years older than them, that kind of got into college baseball before the portal craze and everything. Because remember, even when the portal was first introduced, it wasn't this massive thing that it is now. There were a lot of programs that didn't really know, are we going to be able to get kids from Division II or lower tier D1s, and are those numbers going to actually translate to the SEC or the ACC? And what they discovered is, yeah, they're transferring 100%. You're seeing so many D2 kids that are going up to Power 4 schools. And the reality for most 18 and 19-year-old kids out of high school is that now more than ever, the chances of you breaking into the starting lineup as a freshman are very low. You're talking Drew Burris type player, or maybe just a tier down from Drew Burris, you better be a freshman. Again, one, you better have a spot that's even open, which you have no idea now because they can bring in portal guys a week before the you get on campus. So you may think, oh, I got a spot. As long as I play well, I can outperform these guys that no one else has at bats on the team at that position. Oh, a week before campus, you get on campus, they bring in a portal guy with 600 at bats under his belt. Now that guy's way ahead of you when it comes to making the lineup. So the best route for a lot of guys is going to a really good D2, like a Young Harrison, North Georgia, or North Greenville. Obviously, University of Tampa. A lot of the schools down in Florida. D2s in the Southeast are really good, but there's a lot on the West Coast as well, like a Westmont. That's kind of the new route, guys. Junior college, D2, even high-level D3. UConn, like I've told you, had 6 hitters in their lineup last year that were D3 players. And so that's the route now. Because if you come in as a freshman, you got so little room for error. If they have any doubt about you, they're going to go with the proven guy. Whereas when I came onto campus as a freshman in the fall of 2010, and 2011 was my first season in the spring, you knew, okay, no one else on the team has any starting at-bats or significant amount of at-bats in the outfield. So it's like we're all starting from zero, and I got to prove myself over the fall. I got to show them what I can do, and if I do that, I'll get at-bats. That's not the case anymore, at least for the majority of players that are getting to Division I. Now, for pitchers, it's not as bad of a situation because pitchers, you always want to bring in the high projectability, high metric guys because, one, you're going to be able to develop them. A lot of times you're going to get proven guys in the portal, but unless you're a big-time school, you're not getting those frontline guys that, like a Paul Skeens from Air Force. You're not getting a guy like that at a mid-major, or even a lot of the Power Fours. You're not getting a guy like that. So those high school pitchers are still getting heavily recruited because you're just going to get the most projectability and the most current stuff that you can if you're a big school. Michael Nottleman Jr., welcome back to the chat, Michael. Great quote I heard. We want drinkers, not voters, referring to the age Power 4 are recruiting now. Yeah, that is a great quote. That is a hilarious quote, and that is the reality. It's like, and the point is, guys that have been around, like this is the big deal, especially in the Power 4. Okay, every weekend now in the ACC and the SEC and the Big 12, Big 10, every weekend is do or die. Even when I was in the ACC, it was still one of the top 2 conferences in the country. But you had schools at the time like Maryland who weren't great. Boston College at that time was not great. Wake Forest at the time was not great. And so, like, my team at Georgia Tech, we were like top 10, top 15 in the country every year to start the year. And we knew against those teams, like, we need to sweep. It wasn't like, let's get 2 out of 3. Your goal is always to sweep, but now in the ACC, like, you're just trying to, if you get out of conference with a above 500 record, you're in the tournament, right? You're in the NCAA tournament. My freshman year at Georgia Tech, we went 22-8 in the ACC, and now you don't even see that anymore. You don't see that kind of domination in the ACC anymore because every team is good. You look at Georgia Tech's season last year in the ACC, they got swept by Boston College at home, where if they just win 2 out of 3 there, and that was a team that, with a new head coach, Todd Interdonato, he runs a specific offense that I think is going to be really electric and fun to watch when he gets his guys, but he definitely didn't have the types of players that he likes to have in his lineup. So they were near the bottom of the ACC, and Georgia Tech got swept by them. Now, if Georgia Tech had won 2 out of 3 or swept them, they go from sweating to get into the NCAA tournament to a possible host. That's how tight it is in these conferences now. One weekend series can make it to where you're not in the tournament, or you're sweating on selection day, or you're hosting a regional. That's how tight I'm talking to a lot of the D1 guys, and and people involved in college baseball, they were like, yeah, if Georgia Tech had swept Boston College, they're definitely in the hosting conversation. They're probably getting a host. But because they got swept, they're sweating it on selection day. That's how tight it is. It's a 2 or 3 game swing decides if you're in the NCAA tournament or you're hosting it or you're not in it. So it's just every weekend now. You want guys where situations that come up in those series where a freshman is going to feel some pressure, going to feel a lot of nerves. You want a guy who's been there, done that before. You want a drinker, not a voter. You want a guy that's got 600 at bats under his belt and he's 22 years old and he's graduated already. Now he's taking like 6 hours a week to stay eligible, 6 hours a week to stay eligible. From Canes, in the SEC, 9-8 SC record is hosting a regional. Yeah, and so I mean it's 30 games. So like you saw, I mean, and it was controversial last year, but you saw teams that were 14 and 16, or like University of Florida was 13 and 17 in the SEC, still got in the NCAA tournament. And I think that there's a fine line because obviously, if you're in a conference where you're playing against the best competition, certainly your conference record doesn't need to be as good to get in the NCAA tournament when you're facing if 10 teams in your conference are top 25 teams, like it is like is true in the SEC and the ACC, your top 10 teams in both conferences are in the top 40 in the country. So like I said, there's no easy weekend. But at 13 and 17, it's like, okay, at that point, it's like it's getting iffy. It's getting iffy if, again, you're in the best conference or one of the best conferences in baseball, but at some point, you should have to prove that you're at least average in the conference. And that's my take. It's like if you're below 14 and 16, you probably shouldn't be in the tournament no matter how good your conference is. Again, people can disagree, but one of the things that's beautiful about like the NCAA tournament in basketball and the NCAA tournament in baseball is that you have teams that like Ole Miss was the last team in, they win the national championship. You've had underdogs like that. Like look at Evansville this past year in the NCAA tournament. I mean, they almost make the College World Series. They make Tennessee sweat and take them to Game 3 in the Super Regional. So you still want that excitement from teams that, they got to win their conference championship or they got to ball out all regular season to get in. From Reyes, what advantages have kids that are from minorities or low incomes to get recruited in college like my son? We live in the USA, but we are Dominicans. Usually, Reyes, what's available for you guys is essentially there's usually more academic money that can be allocated to minorities or low income. Again, that school, like at certain private schools, based on the socioeconomic status of the family, they can offer more money or make the tuition less. But in terms of getting recruited to baseball, I think at the end of the day, a coach is recruiting the most talented guys he can. So are coaches focusing on recruiting a certain number of minorities? Maybe. But I think more important than anything else, they're just trying to get the best players. And if that player, who cares if that player is from a Dominican or Asian or whatever? It's about who's the best player. Because ultimately, like we've talked about, coaches' jobs are to win. Their jobs aren't to bring in the best recruiting class. Their jobs aren't to, have the best social media presence or the best facilities. Their job's to win. And so coaches are going to, in their view, bring in the best players they can. And they're going to make mistakes with that. They may pass on a kid who's a minority because they didn't think he's as good as another guy, and then that kid ends up being a star. It's not because he doesn't like minorities or anything like that. It's just because he didn't think the kid was better. And maybe he was wrong. But as far as getting recruited, there's really no there's no advantages, I would say. I do think if you come from a lower income status, there's definitely more motivation for the player to be like, you know what, I want to ball out. I want to get a big a scholarship as I can to help out my parents. You get to pro ball and be a star and sign for $765 million like Juan Soto. That would be nice. And we can talk about that again too, just how, the more I look at it, the more ridiculous I think it is. But we're going to go now. And again, just for an overview, guys, if you just tuned in, the fall roster set date for 34-man roster is now December 1st, which, as Mike Rooney points out, this is materially worse than our current roster management system. And the current system has huge issues. We're going to be cutting massive numbers of players right before finals week, which is 100% right. And he continues down here. All right, I keep forgetting that I got to click on this tweet. The number of players being disqualified from playing D1 baseball each spring, which is already too high, will increase significantly. I'm against mid-year transfers being eligible, but if this doesn't change, that must be strongly considered. 2 thumbs down on this. So this is kind of the general consensus among people that are posting about this right now. And we'll get back to this again later. But right now, I want to get to something else, and maybe we'll cover some funny stuff. But this is a thread that my brother posted out this morning, talking about what is your daily allotment look like. Mike Rooney keeps posting more stuff on his profile. Okay, we'll go to that. Thank you, Canes. Canes, you're like my mod now. All right, we're going to his profile. Let's see what he says. Okay, so here we go. All right, here we go. So Wes C says, well, I see the other side of this, Runes. In my opinion, D1 rosters are too big and have lots of players who just sit. Don't get enough game time to improve their skills and could be playing and starting somewhere else. But the glamour of, and well, I guess we'll click on this, the glamour of saying I am on a roster at a big-time school trumps actually playing baseball every day at a lesser-known school. For me, smaller rosters mean better teams for all schools, including JCs. He's 100% right here, guys. Like, there's just a lot of kids there are a lot of kids out there that would rather go sit the bench at a big-time school. And like my brother posted in a thread last week, make the social media post, I committed to Vandy or Georgia Tech or Auburn or Tennessee or whatever. And then you're just sitting the bench there. And the reality is, if your goal is to play professional baseball, like I always talk about, you got to get on the field. You got to get on the field. So he's not wrong in what he's saying here. Lesser roster spots. Again, you can make the argument again, like in the big leagues, you don't have as many roster spots as you do in college. But again, you have in college, you're trying to get kids educations. Your pitching staffs you're dealing with injuries all the time now. You don't have, again, the difference between the big leagues having a roster size that's smaller is, well, if a guy gets hurt, you put him on the DL and you can call a guy up. In the big leagues, you actually do have a 40-man roster, right? Just a number of those guys are down in the minor leagues. And if a guy gets hurt, you can call up a guy that's on the 40-man roster. Or if he gets hurt and he's going to miss the season and he's on the 60-day, that roster spot now becomes open and you can add another guy to the 40-man. So in the big leagues, you got way more adjustability in your roster than you do in college. So I think Wes is not really thinking through that part. Sure, D1 rosters at 40 seems big, but you don't have any other players after that. And if you have 7 or 8 guys go down, then all of a sudden you're like, we don't got more room for injuries. So I understand what he's saying, but the idea that D1 rosters are too big, I think, is a little short-sighted. Just because even at the professional level, you have a 40-man roster. And again, if guys are season-ending injuries, you can add another guy to the 40-man roster because his spot is no longer taken up. Now, when that guy gets healthy again, he's got to be put back on the 40-man so that you have to make a decision about who stays on the 40-man, who doesn't. But again, you have flexibility, whereas in college baseball, you don't. So we'll see what Mike Rooney responds here. The number of players being disqualified, okay, that's what he responded to. Okay, so here we go. I'm in favor of roster limits, just not on December 1st. Here's how this plays out, in my opinion. Program has 47 players in the fall. That's a big number, I think, for the future. Now that's not uncommon for the current state, and obviously in past years, but certainly in the future, I don't think schools are going to bring in that many guys. I could be wrong, but let's just go with it. Program has 47 players in the fall. 13 are cut on December 1st. Those 13 players are then ineligible to play D1 baseball that spring, not to mention the stress of taking finals and finding a new home. So yeah, I think Rooney's big problem with this is just the date. You're putting kids in a really stressful situation. Like I've told you guys the story. I mean, guys that are balling out in the fall as freshmen are getting told they're cut. So you go from thinking, okay, I balled out in the fall, I'm going to be first guy off the bench. I solidified my spot on the roster, and then you go to a coaches meeting and they say, hey, how do you think you did? And you say, I was really happy with what I did. I felt like I hit the ball well, played really good defense. And they're like, yeah, you did, but you don't have a spot. And so now your whole world is like shaken up because you went into this meeting thinking, I'm going to get told I'm on the travel roster, et cetera, et cetera. Now I got to take finals and try to find a new school. And again, I mean, this is how it's going to go. It may not be 47 players, but if you're not on that 34-man roster, you're getting cut, and then you got to find a school in essentially a month, right? You got to find a school in a month before you can get on campus. So how many guys are going to get cut, and then they can't find a place to go? Because this is the other thing. You're seeing so many guys in the winter portal right now because all these roster size changes and everything. So schools are, they're getting rid of guys to prepare for this next fall. That's not necessarily going to be the case next fall because they know going in we can only have 34 guys. So you're not going to have a massive number of guys or as many that are probably going to go in the portal next year because coaches are just aware of what these changes are now. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's, I think coaches will make that adjustment, which means there's going to be less demand in the transfer portal for other players because other schools are going to be in the same boat. You're not necessarily going to be looking for portal guys. You're just looking at, all right, who are we cutting? Who are we keeping? And maybe you need a guy in the portal, maybe you need two, whatever. But it's not going to be we're going after for 5. And so then what happens to these guys that are cut and then they can't find a school in that month or that month in a week? Now they have to go to a school. They're not even on the baseball team, and it's like their career's over, right? Unless they just continue to train and hope in the summer portal months they can get picked back up. So, I mean, just thinking through more deeply through this, it's just like, dang, I mean, this date is kind of making it harder and harder for players because if you said, the roster decision is done and let's say at the end of fall workout, so like November 7th or November 14th or whatever, then at least you got almost 2 months to figure it out. But again, then you're getting cut in the middle of semester. And it's just a nightmare scenario no matter what. Mike Rooney, again, the maddening part of this 12-1 roster declaration date is that there's a better answer sitting right in front of us. 38 to 40-man roster, that's my preferred range. Declare your roster on August 15th with a small transfer window for players who get cut. Develop that roster for 10 months. I mean, this makes the most sense. This makes the most sense because, one, it allows coaches to bring in more guys. August 15th is, hey, you're on campus. You make it to campus, you're on the team. You're on the roster. Maybe you have guys come in for a summer semester that are walk-ons and see what they can do. But at least now you have a good number of players. You have enough players that you can weather some injuries. Again, we don't know how that's going to work. If you're at 34 and you have 7 arms go down and then you're down to 27, which that's not uncommon, guys. It's not uncommon to have 4 or 5 arms go down, a position player or 2. So it's like the smaller these rosters get, the more likely injuries are just going to totally mess up your season, unless they kind of include in the fine print that you can bring in guys on your roster if you have a certain amount of people hurt. But then it's like, well, that guy hasn't been practicing with the team, so how good is he going to be able to contribute? How well is he going to be able to contribute? I do think this is what Rooney's saying is probably the best case scenario because you got to stick with those guys that you bring in. You got to stick with them. So who knows? I mean, who knows what we're going to do with this? Canes, keep me updated. We'll refresh the page and see if he makes any more posts. But I think, he's kind of spot on with this. All right, so we'll go to kind of what the thread my brother was talking about. in particular. So, guys, a lot of you guys out there, especially players and parents, you don't realize just how much a time commitment being a college athlete is and a college baseball player is. And obviously, it's something that gets overlooked a lot. And one of the things my brother says in this thread is like one of the things he hears a bunch is the assumption is that like there's a lot of free time. And I'll go over kind of what my freshman year was like at Georgia Tech, at least schedule wise. And he says, I played for 2 D1 college programs and made dozens of friends in college summer leagues, pro baseball, and in my line of work who all echo the same sentiment. You better love baseball if you want to play college baseball, 100%. I hear it all the time from parents that want their son to go play somewhere that they can be active on campus groups, be part of Greek life, have a hand in different activities across campus. As a college baseball player, your time is accounted for almost down to the minute. This is 100% true. The reality is, guys, if you're doing on-campus groups and trying to get into a fraternity or something like that, it's going to take away from time you should be dedicating to getting better at baseball. That's just the reality. Doesn't mean some guys haven't done it and had success, but that's the outlier. It's not the norm. If those are your priorities in choosing where to play college baseball, let me be the one to tell you, you don't have enough time in the day. Let me run you through what a normal schedule looks like for a college baseball player. And I'll make some adjustments to this schedule kind of from what was normal for us. Typically, as a freshman, and I talked about this yesterday, you have an 8 a.m. class every day, or at least 3 days a week. So your workouts, you're doing daily workouts. You may have one off day, but you're doing daily workouts. So your lift is going to be typically around 6 a.m. So that means you got to get up, shower if you want to, find a way to get to the place you're working out at. So for Georgia Tech, that would be, we worked out underneath the football stadium where the big weight room is, even though they have a big weight room at the baseball field now. But your team lifts where you got 20 guys there, you want to work out in a big weight room that has all the equipment. So you're going over there. Well, if you're in the freshman dorms as a baseball player, that's on the opposite side of campus. So you got to wake up at 5 a.m., 5:15, either drive down there or because you don't want to show up right as the workout's starting. You want to show up a little bit early, get stretched out, foam roll. So let's just say you're getting up 5 a.m., 5:15 and getting down there. Kane says, there's only one fraternity you're in, and it's the baseball team. Yeah, that's what we called it. The baseball fraternity. That's right. We were a fraternity. We were the baseball team. You don't need to be in a fraternity. You're on the baseball team, right? That's the whole thing. So you go to your team lift, right? Starts at 6 a.m. There are some that start earlier. That's going to be about an hour and a half. So you're going to be done 7:15-ish because you're going to work out and then you're going to have conditioning. And depending on if, guys in your conditioning group aren't making the times, that's going to be longer. So this is kind of spot on right now. You're going to get a protein shake, get as big of, maybe go eat breakfast up in the athletic association where the athletes have a little cafeteria. And then it's like, all right, do I have time to get back and shower or do I just go to my first class? And I'll tell you the answer is most of the time you're just going to your first class after you eat. And so, okay, you go to your first class, which is at 8 a.m. Your classes are going to go anywhere from like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Me, typically, it was 8 a.m. to around 12 p.m. or 12:30 or 1. And obviously every day is a little bit different, but that's generally kind of how it was. You go get lunch, and how we would do it at Georgia Tech, all the guys in my recruiting class, we would have our last class of the day. We'd go pick up lunch, maybe at one of the restaurants on campus, or at one of the cafeterias, and then take the lunch to the baseball field because we wanted to get to the field as early as possible so we could eat, hang out for a little bit, and play some cards or just hang out, and then get ready for practice and early work and everything. So you're grabbing lunch on the way to the field, 100%. You get to the field early. I would typically, like I said, I'd get to the field around like 1:30. And even before your official early work. which is like coaches are out there throwing maybe early BP or doing ground balls or outfield work, etc. Then, so you're going out maybe doing some early work by yourself or with a couple guys in your team. Then you have official early work, and you're doing that because you're trying to make a good impression, right? You want to be the guy that's every day he's there early, every day he's out there working. And I had a bunch of guys in my recruiting class where that was what we did. I can tell you now from coaching just a few years ago, there's less and less of that. There's way more guys that show up 15 minutes before stretch. And again, coaches know that. Coaches know that. And this guy never shows up and works hard early. Never. So then you have practice, right? So you go in your early work from 2:30 to 3 or 2:45 to 3:15. Then you go stretch with your team at 3:15. 15-minute stretch, get loose. Then practice starts. And these practices are going to be typically you're going to go over defense work, infield plays, bunt coverages, PFPs, individual position defense stuff. So outfielders taking fly balls. That's going to be about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Then you're going into BP, which that's going to be an hour. Everyone's going to hit. And then you're going into an inner squad that may last. And again, if you have a long inner squad, you're going to skip that defense stuff usually, or you may hit in the cages early for BP because your inner squad may be 2 hours or 2.5 hours because there is a certain allotment of time you have per week to practice. But your typical practice in the fall is going to end around anywhere from 6:30 to 7 o'clock. Or 6 o'clock to 7, right? You're going to have some days that are a little bit, practice ends a little bit earlier or practice ends a little bit later, but generally around 6:30-ish. So now you go in, you shower, get dressed. Now you're going to go eat dinner. Typically as a freshman, you're going to go eat dinner over again at the athletic association where the athletic cafeteria is. And they have, kind of healthier food, I guess you could say. And then as a freshman with a lot of your classes, just to help you kind of get off on the right foot, you're going to have tutoring sessions, meaning, whatever class, if it's survey of calculus or, an economics class or something like that, you're going to have in a group of like 10 of you, you're going to have a tutor that goes over, what you've covered in the week to help you kind of relock that in your brain. Any questions you have, more one-on-one basis than in like a class of 300 people where you really can't ask questions that effectively. And so then at that point, it's like 8:30 and then you're going home. So the idea that like you want to join a fraternity and you want to be active on campus doing things, it's like you're active on campus all day. And again, the older you get, this schedule becomes a little more lax because your junior year, you probably don't have any tutoring sessions. You're probably living off campus. So you're getting food at your house or your apartment, wherever you're living. And the older you are as well, you don't have 8 a.m. classes. So you don't have to be in that early workout group. You can be in that maybe 9 a.m. workout group or an 8 a.m. workout group, just depending on what the day-to-day schedule is. And then really the only time you have, when you're on campus, the only time where you have a lot of free time is after fall workouts and early part of November when you don't have practice anymore, you don't have baseball activities anymore. Now, as a baseball player, this is the time that separates guys, the guys that play and the guys that don't, because a lot of guys just say, I'm taking a break. And the guys that are dedicated you still have your workouts. You're still lifting weights and conditioning and everything like that, but you don't have baseball practice. But a lot of us who, our goal was to play, we'd still go to the field, hit in the cage, do some throwing, everything like that, just to stay in shape. But that time frame from the end of fall workouts till middle of December when you're finishing up finals, you have a lot more time on your hands. You finish up class at 12, you go get lunch, and then you can kind of hang out. Go get some individual baseball stuff in, and then by 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you're done for the day. You can get your homework done or study some, and then chill. But again, even in this schedule, I didn't include like you get home at 8:30 and then you got homework due, or you got a group project meeting Like guys, sometimes in college, especially as an athlete, like you're busy until 10 or 11 o'clock at night because you have a group of regular students in your group project, and you tell them like, hey, I can't meet till like 9:30, and they're like, okay, so let's go meet at the library or another one of the buildings that a lot of people study in. So you got to walk or drive down there to go to a group. And so you get home at like 11 o'clock. And then again, you have a morning workout the next day. So there's not a lot of time as a college baseball player. And this is why, he says you better love baseball, because this part of being a college athlete, like really grinds guys down and wears them down. They don't understand the time commitment that comes with being a college athlete. And so he's spot on with this thread. This is your schedule for 80% of the fall semester, right? Exactly what I said. To this point in your life, you'll have never had this little time to yourself. And more importantly, you'll have never played this much baseball. You better love it, or you'll be one of the guys that gets weeded out. 100%. And this does weed out a lot of guys. If you're a player out there that's committed, or you'll be committed soon, like this is the reality when you get on campus. This is, and especially at a high academic institution like Georgia Tech, at some schools, study hall hours were not mandated or mandatory at Georgia Tech. Now, if all of a sudden first month of the semester, or after those first, exams, you weren't looking so hot in the GPA category, they may say, hey, you need to do study hall hours. But a lot of schools do, for freshmen, make you got to do 10 hours of study hall a week. So you got to spend 10 hours in the study hall area, working on homework, working on studying, everything like that. And again, this weeds guys out because they think they're going to get to college and they're going to be able to do all this fun stuff. And again, you have time to have fun. Like I said, you can have fun in college. There's nothing wrong with that. But it makes it to where like the guys that are dedicated, you figure out who the guys that are dedicated real fast. The spring season brings with it much more of a complex schedule. 2 to 3 days a week, you'll have midweek games followed by, and again, this is a little off here. I mean, you'll have 1 or 2 games in the midweek. Typically, you'll have 1 game in the midweek on Tuesday. You may have a Wednesday game as well. The other days are going to be practice days, just like they were in the fall. And then Thursday, if you're on the road, you're going to be traveling on Thursday. So you're going to be riding the bus or getting on a plane, flying into where you're playing, or driving into where you're playing. You could be playing 6 hours away. You're getting on that bus, and then you're on the road for the weekend. So you don't got a weekend. You don't got a weekend in college baseball in spring. You don't get the weekend unless you don't make the travel roster. And so maybe when your team's on the road, but you don't want to be the guy that's not on the travel roster, right? So every weekend from early February through late May, right up till conference tournament, you're gonna be grinding. And like he says, sometimes you don't get home until well past midnight from a road game series on Sunday. 100%, because your game starts at 1 on Sunday. So let's say 3-hour game, 3.5 hour game, that's 4:30, and now you got to drive 5 hours or 6 hours, or you got to get on a plane and fly back, and then you got class the next day, and you're expected to be in class, and you got homework due. Guys are doing homework on the bus. Guys are doing projects, work on the bus on the way home. It's not fun. Now I tried to set myself up so I didn't have to do that on the bus, so I could hang out. You want to hang out with your boys after a series dub on the way home, but sometimes you got to do it. And with travel and showing up to games early at home, you will likely miss 30% of your classes, right? So like if you schedule, if you have a class on Friday that's from 1:30 to 2:30, well, you're not going to that class because you got a game at 4:00, or you got a game at 5:00. And I think your window is typically like 4 hours before game time. You don't have to be in class. Now, later in the season, when those Friday games go to like 7:00, you're probably going to be expected to. But some professors will be pretty lenient and be like, hey, you got a game, like go get ready for the game. Some of them won't. My point is this: if your priorities in choosing a college baseball program don't have anything to do with baseball, save yourself the heartache. Just go to college and be a student. Being a college baseball player is your life for 4 years. That's right. I mean, I've talked to you guys about this, but the reality for most guys out there is like the last thing you should be considering are things outside of the college program. And really, the most important thing is, am I going to get a chance to fight for a position my freshman year? If you embrace it and baseball is your passion, I can guarantee you this: those 4 years will be the most formative and rewarding years of your life, and you'll meet some of your best friends. This is 100% true. Almost all the guys that were the hard workers, that were the studs, that goals were to play professional baseball, that I made friends with in my recruiting class my freshman year of college, I'm still in a group text with them today. We play fantasy football every year. We talk trash to each other every day. And again, it's friendships for life. And the guys, I think the portal has kind of taken that away from players. And I'm interested to hear what you guys think, any questions you have about it. But man, when you're transferring every year, like there's something about the freshmen the guys you got onto campus with, you went through gut check day, you made it through all the hard conditioning days, you made it through the days that were just a struggle. First of all, those are the only things you remember. Your best memories looking back are, man, remember when Steve Tambora, our strength coach, messed up the conditioning day and didn't realize how hard it was going to be, but he still made us do it? Remember that? Remember the day we had to push the shopping cart with 100 pounds, 100 yards, and Connor Kendrick, first step after pushing it, sprinting back 100 yards, just face planted because his quads gave out. Like those are the memories I'll never forget. And if you ask any college player that's, long past his playing days, if you said, you know what, you got to go back, you can go back and play college baseball, but you got to have a gut check day every day. We'd all sign up in a heartbeat. Where do I sign? Where do I sign? Because those are the most fun days, man. The days when you're gasping for air and dying and breathing. And this guy says L, which I'm not sure what he's saying L to, but let's see here. Michael, PE teacher, head groundskeeper for a 5-diamond baseball complex. Okay. He's definitely right in everything he's saying. All right, so Tennessee has over 20 commits for 2025. Yeah, and I think that's going to change. There's just no way you can bring in 20 guys. Now, if that's your total, because a lot of guys now, Thomas, what a lot of guys you're seeing, a lot of times you're seeing in these commitment numbers is portal and high school combined. That's still going to be a big number. But again, I mean, even if those guys do make it onto campus, a lot of those guys are going to get cut. So it's a bad decision if you're one of those guys. Again, some of you guys are going to get great opportunity at Tennessee. They have one of the best staffs in the country. I love those guys. But certainly 20 of you, there's a good number that are going to get cut, right? There's just no way that many guys are going to stick on the roster with all these changes. From Canes, Miami in the last 2 recruiting class, we maybe have 4 or 5 guys left in those classes. Yeah, I mean, that's the new reality, because in every recruiting class, unless you're had to bring in a massive number, you're going to have maybe 2 contributors in the lineup now. You're going to have more contributors in the pitching staff. But again, if guys the problem is what you're seeing is even guys that get a lot of innings, they're maybe upset that they're not on the starting rotation. They were a really good bullpen arm, but they're not getting to start. So they want to transfer to go be a starter. So even guys that get a lot of innings or at bats, they're not exactly, they're not going to stay if they still are unhappy with their position. Those are players from the 2022 and 2023 class. Yeah, and that's normal, because the further you get away from guys getting on campus, the more and more of those players that are going in the portal. So it's pretty normal. Thomas, Miami has 19. We have 19 high schoolers. Yeah, and again, it's just that it's going to be possible to bring in that large a number, but certainly a lot of those guys are going to get cut that fall with this new roster set date. And you can bring in that many high school guys and keep a good number of them, but you're not going to bring in a lot of portal guys. So it's just, something has to give, right? You can't bring in a bunch of high school guys in a big portal class. And if you do that, you're going to have to cut a big number of guys. From Thomas here, Tennessee has over 20 commits for 2025 listed on PG. What happens there? Yeah, I mean, what I would say, Thomas, is probably, again, don't know for sure. But sometimes on PG, like they're pretty slow to update, especially the guys that decommit, right? Because it's hard to, so many kids that have been cut from the 25 class, there's so many of them, like it's in the thousands, that you can't keep up with all of them. You can't keep up with them. So maybe that list will get updated at some point. I can promise you, they're not going to bring in 20 guys on campus in August. There's just no way. Especially with Tennessee, like they're going to get the best guys in the portal too. They're going to get the best players in the portal. So there's just no way. And if you do bring in all 20, let's say all 20 of them get to campus, a good chunk of those guys are going to get cut on December 1st. Canes, I asked the Miami coach that same question. He said guys won't show up to campus most likely, and he said all schools will have to do the same. That was before roster date. And this is a good point too, Canes. This is a good point. Thomas, a lot of guys on let's say on Tennessee's recruiting class, they may have like 5 top 15 players in the nation that they're totally expecting are going to get signed and get drafted. Are going to get drafted and signed. So, and especially at every Power 4, Tennessee especially, you're going to have a 1 or 2 guys minimum that you're thinking this guy's probably going to get drafted and sign. So you know that going in. You know that again, and if for some reason they don't sign, they don't get enough money or whatever, that's a good problem to have. You can figure that out. He's going to come on campus. Certainly, he's going to take someone else's spot that might have had a better shot. But in a lot of these commitments, you're seeing guys that are, number 5 player in the country, and he's projected to go 16th overall in the draft. If he goes 16th overall in the draft, he's signing. That's just the reality. And so that's another aspect, Canes, that I know we've talked about in the past that every schools like Miami, Georgia Tech, they lose a few high schoolers to the draft every year. Most Power 4s, at least in the Southeast, lose a few guys to the draft every year. That's just the reality. So that's a part of it as well. New question for you, Kyle. From what the Miami coach said, now that we know the roster limit date, how does that change the Miami coach's perspective? Can you give me a perspective on what exactly? About bringing in the high school guys? Clarify it a little bit for me, Canes. And then we'll get into kind of the last topic I wanted to talk about today. Just about how recruiting typically goes in the winter. A lot of high school, as Canes clarifies this for me. Guys, a lot of you out there in a 26 class, especially right now, 25s, it's a nightmare. We all know that. It's a nightmare what the NCAA has done. But 26s especially, you may start feeling like, man, I haven't heard from coaches in a while. I got a video coming out later today that's going to cover this more in depth. But a lot of dead periods in November and December, a lot of recruiting shutdowns. And think about like this, guys. Coaches are pretty much on working 12-hour days almost every day, except for this time period. So in the spring, you're getting to your office in the morning and you're there until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And then games start and you're working weekends, you're working later than even when practices are going. And then the summer comes and you're out recruiting all summer. And you're going to the summer college, the college wood bat leagues, and you're going to the travel ball circuit. And so you're out traveling like that all the time. And then you're back for the fall and you're doing fall workouts and fall practices. So you don't have a lot of time for your family and everything like that. So this fall and winter period, late fall and early winter period, coaches are trying to spend more time with their family. So you see a lot of, recruiting slows down, at least conversations wise, typically. And Canes, I see you, just what you wrote to Thomas. All right, I'll look at that in a second. If my 2026 right-handed pitcher son wants to go to College A, and College A website announces they just signed 6 2026 right-handed pitchers, is it fair to say that they probably won't be looking for many more right-handed pitchers? It's hard to say, BA. Again, you always need as many arms as you can get. The reality is, it's just it depends on the type of pitchers that are. Again, no one has signed 626s yet. They've committed, but you can't sign your financial aid agreement, what it's called now, until the 26s will be next November. So things could change, but it depends on what the roster makeup looks like. Let's say College A is going to have 9 pitchers drafted, or they're going to have 5 pitchers drafted, 5 graduate, and 5 are going to leave for the portal. Well, they're going to need a lot of arms. So it's hard to say on an individual basis, just because every college and institution, the needs are going to be different. Certainly, they may say, even to like guy like myself or our other advisors, like, hey, we're not really looking for any more right-handed pitchers in the 26 class. And then all of a sudden, a kid comes out of nowhere and he's throwing 95 and he's commanding stuff. They'll make room for him. They'll figure out a way to get it done. So it's hard to say, unless I know the roster makeup of the team and have talked to the coaches and know what they're looking for, which is what we do, right? Like when I reach out to a school and that I have a good relationship with, I say, hey, like, what's the situation in the 26 class for you? What are your biggest needs? And pretty much everybody is always still looking for arms. Almost everybody. Like, that's the last thing they're still looking for. So I would assume they're probably still looking for arms, but if they already have 6 guys committed, they may be a little more picky with what they're looking for. So Canes, let me go back up. Oh, with 19, are you talking about with 19 high schoolers? Guys won't show up to campus most likely, and he said all schools will have to do the same. That was before the roster date was set. Guys won't show up to campus. So I guess it just means by what he means by guys aren't showing up to campus. Because what I get from that is there are going to be guys that get drafted and don't show up. But certainly there's not going to be a huge number that just decide. Maybe there's going to be a certain number of guys that say, you know what, like, this may not be a good scenario I'm walking into. Maybe I should just decommit and go somewhere else. But I don't think there's going to be a large number of players that are just not going to show up to campus without a certain reason behind it. And so, guys, if you're in the 26 class right now and you're like, you know what, recruiting slowed down, just don't panic. And don't go to like NCAA website. In my video coming out, I'll show you all the dates that are this winter. And then obviously you get into a contact period, March 1st all the way to July 31st, where coaches can go out and watch players again and talk in person and everything like that. But just don't panic if you're not hearing a lot right now and you were talking with schools just a month ago. Because this is just a quieter period in recruiting. Coaches are being around their family. They're traveling for Thanksgiving. They're traveling for Christmas. They're trying to get everything set up for Christmas and everything like that. You got New Year's coming up. Maybe they're making a trip for New Year's. So there's just a lot going on, and they're trying to stay on top of recruiting around the different dead periods and everything. So, like, for example, in my video and up here on my whiteboard, I got, December 22nd to the 27th, dead period, total recruiting shutdown, not just a dead period. You can't have any communication, can't do anything. And then January 2nd to January 5th, dead period. So there's just a lot of these that we've been going through since November 11th through the 14th, November 26th through the December 1st. So there's just been a lot of that going on. And just don't panic if you think, oh man, I'm not getting a lot of traction with schools now. I thought I was on the right track. And then all of a sudden, everything kind of fell off, if that makes sense. So I want to go back here. Let's see here. We're going to talk a little bit more before we go. I want to see if Mike Rooney said anything else about this. And for those of you guys who missed it, obviously the new recruiting date is set for December, not recruiting date, the roster set date. So the date you have to have your 34-man roster set is December 1st. And there's a lot of uproar about this going on right now that, doesn't make much sense. And I think Rooney's got the best response to this. And I'll just share it one more time because I know some of you guys have tuned in late. But I'm in favor of roster limits, just not on December 1st. Here's how this plays out, in my opinion. Program has 47 players in the fall, or however many over the roster limit. So 13 have to be cut by December 1st. Those 13 players are now ineligible to play Division I baseball that spring, not to mention the stress of taking finals and finding a new home. Right? So a lot of issues with some of this stuff going on. And to me, I guess what I said earlier, it makes it difficult too, because if you make the date December, let's say December 15th, and finals are over by then, well, then the kid has like 2 weeks to find another school before guys start getting back to campus, or 3 weeks. So now you got a really short time frame. When the portal date is, typically the, Sunday after Thanksgiving. So close to December 1st, but not exactly that. And I think a lot of schools will probably try to inform their players who are getting cut as fast as possible, just so you give those guys as much opportunity to get somewhere else. But I think Rooney's solution of just making it to where you have a 38 to 40 man roster that's got to be set by August 15th when they get on campus. You have a very small transfer window for players who get cut if you bring in, but and this is the other thing, so I don't know exactly this, but if you had let's say the roster was 40 again, and the roster set date is August 15th, well, that's like the first day you step on campus in college. Like middle of August is when you get to campus. And so if the roster has to be set then, I guess you're going to make it to where guys have a small window after that to leave if they want to, and then schools can maybe add a few guys from the portal depending on how many to leave. I guess that makes sense. I am more in favor of this than what the current thing is. What this new set date is, just December 1st. It just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make much sense. I want to show this video because this is pretty funny, guys. This is Juan Soto in his prime, and before you go, he'll go to DH. It won't be that easy. Soto is proud of his fielding, doesn't want to DH. He'll dig his heels in, especially after his big contract. So this is him on defense. We'll start it over. This is the $765 million man on defense. Like, it's that bad, guys. I mean, it's that bad. And I tend to agree with a lot of people about this contract. It seems like, this is the kind of money you give just an all-around phenom. Again, like Juan Soto he is an amazing hitter. No one's taking that away from him. He's never won an MVP. He's a defensive liability who's going to have to be a DH. And if you're paying him $50 million a year, you probably want him to DH because you don't want him to be running around in the outfield and pull his hamstring and then have a nagging injury for the rest of the year. So then you're paying a DH $51 million a year, $52 million a year. No money deferred. So this is going to impact every year. $50 million going to be on the payroll. Now for Steve Cohen, it's probably not a big deal. He doesn't care. Canes, did you see Aubrey Huff's reaction? Yeah. And I think he's right on the money, right? Aubrey Huff, he's done he said some controversial things on social media, but I think in regards to Juan Soto, I think he's 100% correct. I'm dying for him to show up around the ballpark. I don't think he's been back to University of Miami in ages. Yeah. Hey, he's one of the best, though. Hey, I got to be in the clubhouse with Ryan Braun, another one of Miami's best, for a few seasons in big league camp with the Brewers. But, I think he's spot on with his kind of criticisms of this contract because, like, you have players, and again, like, the issue is, like, a guy like Mike Trout. He's really good on defense. He's won, multiple MVPs. Consensus best player in baseball when he's healthy. Now, he's had injury issues, right? I mean, Mike Trout, the biggest knock on his career is that he's had injury issues. He can't stay healthy. He misses large chunks of the season. Juan Soto has missed missed once a large portion of the season, but he's had some injuries, and he's only 26. That's going to become more and more of an issue the older he gets. And again, he hit a lot of home runs at Yankee Stadium, which we all know. I mean, Yankee Stadium is a juice box for left-handed hitters, because that right field wind tunnel and short porch, you get a lot of extra balls out. So again, he's going to be a stud hitter for the Mets. Don't get me wrong; he's going to be a stud hitter for the Mets. But is he going to be worth $765 million for 15 years? Jury's still out on that. And I do think this is one of those contracts where everyone involved knows you're overpaying. You know you're gonna regret this at some point unless he decides to opt out. But the reality is that I don't know how he's going to get more than $51 million a year by the time his opt out is available. I think 2029. So he'll be 30 years old around that time, or 31, and he's not gonna, you're not gonna pay a 31-year-old $50 million a year unless you're doing like a 2-year deal. And so why would you, or a 3-year deal? Why would you take that if you have that guaranteed for another 10 by the Mets? So I just think he's going to be a Met for life at this point. He'll be a Met for life. And if they win a World Series or two, they'll be totally for it. They'll be totally for it, right? That's really the crux of it. Do they win a World Championship or not? And if they do, they'll say it's 100% worth it, and not many people will care. But if they don't, then it's going to go down as maybe the worst contract in history, potentially. From Maurice, now they do not care about strikeout 200 times, batting average 190. Today is about satisfying the fans. They do not care about how many errors you make. Soto is compared with the best hitters that ever played. Yeah, and again, like he is an elite hitter, but you look at his number, he's a 285 career hitter. He averages about 30 to 35 home runs a year. He walks at a very high rate. He's going to get on base. But he provides negative value on defense. So his defense is so bad that he takes away value from his offense. And the other thing is, does he stay healthy? Right? Because now if he provides negative value on defense, well, he better be in there every game playing offense. He better be in there every game playing offense, or it's a terrible contract. Right? Because if you give a contract like this to a shortstop who's an above average to elite defender, you're getting crazy value on defense. You're getting crazy value on offense. But when you give it to a corner outfielder, number one, corner outfielders if you want to play corner outfield in the big leagues, you got to bang. I mean, you got to be one of the best hitters in the world. So it's not like you're giving this contract to let's just go over this. So typically, your lowest OPS on average per position is catcher, then center fielder, then shortstop, or catcher, shortstop, center field, in that order. Your highest OPSs are in the corner outfield spots and the corner infield spots. So the reason guys that are stud shortstops like a Fernando Tatis, and now he's not even playing shortstop, but your guys that are really good shortstops and great bats, or great center fielders and great bats like a Mike Trout, or great catchers and great bats. The reason they get big time money is because you're getting defensive value and offensive value at positions where you typically don't get that kind of offensive production. Now, I always asked my dad this. Obviously, most of you guys know my dad was a general manager in the major leagues for a long time, front office executive for my entire life. And he always said the reason pitchers, I always said, why does a starting pitcher get the most money? Why do starting pitchers for a time were getting the biggest contracts, $30 million a year, $35 million a year? And I just said, would you rather have a position player or, a number one true ace for the same amount of money? And he always said, yeah, you go with the pitcher every time. And the reason was a starting pitcher that's that good, that's the losing streak stopper. That's the skid stopper. You come up against Justin Verlander in his prime or Max Scherzer in his prime. and you're on a 2 or 3 game losing streak and he's on the mound, you're winning. You got a really good shot of winning. And so the teams that prioritize, like the Braves were so good for so long, and my dad was there for pretty much the second half of that, because they had Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, Kevin Millwood, Steve Avery, all these guys that were just stud pitchers. And so my dad's philosophy was always, you get really good pitching and you have really good defenders, and then you hope you have enough offense. You don't need as much offense when you have elite arms and elite defenders, because you make all the double plays. Your pitchers don't give up a lot of runs. And so that was his philosophy, was like, the reason true ace starting pitchers get the biggest contracts are because they are the losing streak stoppers. Now, the reason I think you're seeing that change is because now the arm injuries in professional baseball are going up so dramatically, and all these aces that are getting big contracts are, getting hurt and they're missing half the year. So all of a sudden you're like, I don't want to put that much money invested in these guys because the arm could blow up in any second. Aris Reyes, now what they see is if the player can help the team win, and who is the one who bring the run in on clutch. He ain't my favorite player. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's kind of gone out the window now, Reyes. Like the old school, like a lot of these analytics GMs, whether you agree with them or not, they don't believe in clutch. And again, this is something that I talk about all the time. Because this is the argument that people make on social media all the time. They say, well, he's not clutch. He just happens to get his hits in situations with runners on base, or he's got a lot of guys that get on in front of him. He's not clutch. He just has a lot of guys getting on in front of him, and he just happens to get hits. Well, that tells me they've never stepped in the box with 2 outs in the bottom of the 8th in a tie game with a runner on second. Because in your mind, you got nerves. You know what your job is. And the best guys, they get better when those nerves hit them and they know the pressure's on. And guys that are clutch, and I was one of those guys my entire career with runners in scoring position. I think I hit 360. And runners on second and third, no out, I hit 400. Like that was something that I prided myself on, that when the situation needed it and I was at the plate, I put up a good at bat and got those runs in. They don't believe in that now. They don't believe in clutch players. They think that it's just kind of happenstance that you happen to get, you get 150 hits a year and, you just had a large portion of them with guys on base. It's just like, that's a reason. So that's why you see a bunch of these players that have like 25 home runs and like 50 RBIs, because all their RBIs are from home runs with in not big situations, either big leads or you're down big and you come up with the guy on base and the pitchers, you're not in a close game. And so there's no pressure. So you hit a bomb and you get 2 RBIs. Right. And that's not what was valued back in the day. What was valued is like, you were a guy that you were going to drive in runs. Like the RBI stat as well is like, nobody thinks about that anymore. Nobody thinks that's important. That's just a luck. You just happen to drive runs in because you got a hit with guys on base. There's no skill involved in it. That's what they say. And sure, there may be a guy who 1 year he's really good with runners in scoring position and the rest of his career he's not. But there are certain guys that have a track record in their career that when guys are on base and the game's close late, they deliver. And so it's a skill, but it's not looked at as that anymore. So guys, I think I'm going to call it there. Appreciate all the comments and all the questions. Again, we'll be back tomorrow around the same time. Maybe we'll see some more stuff coming out about this set date and more reactions to it, and we'll cover that. Again, if you're looking for help in the process in recruiting, go to this QR code, scan it, fill out our form. We'll meet with you, talk about our process, our network, our connections with coaches, how we can help you, where may be a good fit for you and for where you're at right now currently in your process, and see if it makes sense to move forward. So